Thank you for coming to Eclipse Day Toulouse again. I hope you enjoyed the day so far. So I'm Cédric Brun, I'm a CTO of Obeo, and I'm a committer in the Hyperlink Intent project, and I'm also involved in the modeling PMC if you came to my talk early this morning.
Yes, Tristan Faure, Eclipse committer on Papyrus and Gendoc2 model, and I'm responsible for TOPCASED platform at Atos.
So we decided to take this chance of having Eclipse Day Toulouse to give a brief overview of what you have in Eclipse to create documentation, to publish documentation. That's something almost everybody is doing. In fact, there are tools in Eclipse. They are not very known. And we'll focus on Gendoc2 and Intent, and you'll see how they could be useful to you and what you can do with them. But I'll start with a brief overview of all the technology so that you can, well, see how they relate. So we have quite a lot of tools regarding authoring and publishing in Eclipse. We have Vex, which is a visual editor for XML. So you might use this editor with Darkbook, for instance, if you want to write documentation. The Wikitext project, which is quite popular, provides the ability to edit wiki syntax and to export and publish HTML or Eclipse help from this syntax. It supports a bunch of syntax like MediaWiki, Textile, Creole, and so on. Two new components in the MyLinDark project. One is HTML text. It's a WYSIWYG editor for HTML. And the MyLin EPUB project, which brings EPUB publishing, EPUB, which is quite a pseudo-standard format for electronic books. And well, I did put BERT too, because BERT is, well, it's not really focused on documentation, proper sharing, but still it's document reports, and BERT is a big thing, so I felt a bit awkward not putting it somewhere in the slide. So another aspect out of authoring and publishing is content management. I've handled a few projects, Apricot, which is created by Nuxeo, which is a content repository. So it handles the data for you. You can put structured or semi-structured data in it. It's going to handle the versioning and the workflows you want to bind with the data. And the Remus project is very not a project which is well known, and it's quite an interesting approach. It allows you to browse the web to find piece of data everywhere and to stack that into a repository and then share this repository or search through it. So the project is, in fact, pretty cool. You should have a try if you want, if you search for something or doing some kind of research or documentation. And the last three projects are in some way related to modeling. So Gendoc2 model, which is about reverse engineering documentation in, I don't know, Word format or Office format into a model. It's often used to retrieve requirements, for instance, from a requirement document and get a model from it, and then you can use it in your tool. And Gendoc2, which Tristan is going to present later on, but which is focused in processing a document. It's a bit like the inverse step that Gendoc2 model. And the MyLin Intent project, which I'm going to show just after. So if you put all these components, I did split everything in different areas. So you have authoring, publishing, well, things which are related to modeling in some way, and discovery, so retrieving data from the existing world. So Remus is about that too, and Gendoc2 model. And So some components are very good at one specific aspect. They're even only focused on one aspect. And which is interesting in the intent project, it's a bit of a mix between all that. Obviously, it's not doing all the stuff the users are doing. It's a smaller scale, right? So let's see what the Mylin intent project is about. Documentation is probably one of the most important things in your software and your software development process. It's often one of the only communication channel you have between you and your user, or at least it's one of the big ones. And it's also an important communication channel for your development team, right? It's supposed to be something which reflects the state of the system. But while in reality, documentation is very poor and sucks in general. Why so? Because first, doc update is something very painful to do. And so you don't do it as long as you develop, for instance. So you end up at the end reviewing all the documentation and updating the parts. Or some guy did some parts, or another guy did not. And so at the end, you get a documentation which is just unsynchronized with the system, and having this documentation is just useless. So we tend to do it because we have to do it, but we're not using it. And we should be using it because it's a communication channel which is very important. Quite a few years ago, Donald Knuth, the father of LaTeX and lots of things in programming in general, proposed the idea of iterate programming. That was quite a breakthrough, saying, okay, you don't have to write code, you should not write code, you should write a book with pieces of code inside, and the book is the master, and the code is just some artifact from the book. It's just transform, compile, and the code is always up to date with the book, because, in fact, you only have the book. So it did not work out pretty well. I don't know if any of you ever used this kind of practice, but mostly because you can't really say that you have to start by the book. I mean, we have tools to develop, and these tools are efficient for a reason. We're using them for that reason, and we don't want to drop those tools because we have to code into some kind of document. And on the other hand, Knuth's approach is about putting everything, all the pieces, into the book so that you're able to produce the software from the book. And, well, you don't necessarily need that. So we took the base idea and we applied it on using models. We generalized it using models, and we built it on top of Eclipse modeling. And so we created what we call iterate modeling. It's just changed the last word, and it's what the Mylin intent project brings. So in a nutshell, an intent is a documentation environment, but intent synchronize your documentation with the real artifacts, being models or being source code or configuration files and so on. And it's extensible and customizable so that you can just define what you want to be synchronized and in what way. It's part of a Mylin project. It's still in incubation phase, but you might want to try it and have a look. We're releasing the 0.7 version with Juno, and we just released the RC1 this week. So instead of many documentation files and many artifacts, here artifacts being models or source code and so on, you end up with one intent document which is mixing both. So you have formal parts which describe the model elements or parts of the model elements and parts of the system, and, well, parts in natural language which are targeted to the audience, which explain the reason why you design the system that way, for instance. And this document is transformed in a set of models which get compared with the real artifact. So when you change an artifact, if this change is not reflected in the document and you wanted this change to be synchronized or this information to be synchronized, then intent is going to say, okay, the documentation is not up to date or your code is not up to date. It's up to you to decide. Intent is not doing something more for you than detecting the change and allowing you to measure this change and then fixing it. So I move on a demo now. So let's imagine we are building some kind of website, web application with shopping carts, something to sell stuff. And we have different kind of coupons and offers. So we decided to extend intent and implement a bridge which enforce our rules on the system and what should be synchronized in the document. So here we've got the project, we've got the system itself, so offer catalogs and database, and the IDOC project, which is an intent project. So when we open the intent project, we see the documentation. And we have different kind of offers. So you see it's documentation, and we're going to add a new kind of offer. So we just decided to start by the documentation. We could have decided to start by adding the offer into the system. So we're adding a section to describe a new offer, which is a special promotion offer. We describe it with natural language so that the documentation is useful. You still have to write stuff and explain stuff. And then we'll say that, okay, we add into the catalog this offer. So that's the formal part. We're just describing a part of model or part of the system. Like the catalog is supposed to have a new offer, which is the special promotion offer. So we have completion, validation, colors, and so on. We're trying to make the tooling quite nice. And now intent says, okay, you have a new offer, it's okay, it's valid, but it's not synchronized with your working copy, which is your workspace, which is your system itself. So you see that in the document, we have an offer which is not existing into the system. So we are going to fix that and just create the corresponding class. Here we decided that an offer is represented by a class. But that part of the thing you might customize depending on your own constraint and the way you map stuff from the system to your model. So now we did create the offer. And so the warning is gone and everything is synchronized. Now, if we change from the source code, let's say we add a description to this offer in the source code. This description is used by the system to, I don't know, show this information into the UI. So the code gets analyzed, and the intent document says, well, something is wrong, you're not in sync with the system. So you can see the differences again. And you can see now that the attribute description into the offer exists in the system and not in the documentation. So we'll add it into the documentation. We'll use Control-O shortcuts to find where all the offer descriptions are documented so that we update the right chapter. And we end up in the offer management page section, and we add the new description. So that in our documentation, we decided that all the descriptions of the offers should be documented in this specific section. That's a choice you can make depending on how you think people are most likely to understand the documentation. The tool is not enforcing some kind of organization. You can put all the pieces of data wherever you want. And a very quick one. Now let's say we want to support the localization. So here we added a special check which said, okay, you probably need to localize your strings. And so the warning is, the offer type should be localized. And here we say, okay, it's externalized. We just say true. But then the model is valid, the document is valid, meaning it's correct, but it's not synchronized with the real system. So we're going to change the system so that the string is externalized. So we're just using the Eclipse wizard, externalizing the string, and now the intent document is fine with that. So the whole approach is about using the best tool you need to do something, and the documentation is not getting into your way. So sometimes you might use the Eclipse wizard, sometimes you might use some modeling tools, sometimes you might update the information directly into the document. But it's really up to what best tool will work, what tool will work best. It's up to you to choose. The three things to remember is, intent keeps your doc up to date with the concrete world, being models, source code, configuration files, you tell it. It allows you to check high-level constraint. And intent needs you, meaning, give it a shot and give us feedback, whether you like the approach or not, whether you found issues or you're missing some very strong feature. So tells us that the 0.7 version is allowing you to author doc and synchronize it to export through HTML and to plug your specific rules and parser into it. And now Tristan is going to tell us about Gendoc2.
Thank you. So Gendoc2, the context is not the same. We are here in the context where the documentation it has to be an artifact of our modelization, our modeling. We are in model-based system engineering. We have made our design, our specification in models, and now we want to export it as a document using a tool, in this case, Gendoc2. What we want is, it exists a lot of tools. We can generate dogbook using Excelio. It works pretty well. There is no problem. The fact is, we work in companies, and in companies there is quality services, and in quality services there is TOPCASED quality, document quality charts, and we have to deal with it. What we want with Gendoc2 is we want to keep the style and the global look and feel of the document. I want, when I apply a style, I want to keep it in my final document. Our credo is what you write it, you get it at the end. And how do we deal with this? We use the M2T Excelio generation that we write directly in the document, seeing what we will obtain at the end of the generation. An example that I like is an example of table. Okay, I have the table with the style I want, a header in blue. I want my rows in white. And with Excelio, I said for each package, I want each element. In my column number of classes, I will say how many classes each package have. The result is here. We have the table corresponding to the style I applied previously. No surprise. And if I want to adjust my table, I change the Word or OpenOffice properties. I don't change the code. I don't change nothing in Eclipse. Some people normally know Gendoc2, so I recommend you to take the documentation on internet. I will present the latest features available in TOPCASED 5.2, released recently. So we can now deal, all the latest features have been made to be Gendoc2 more industrial, to adapt Gendoc2 to your process and say, okay, you have your templates, now deal with that and be integrated in your process. One of the first features is the usage of the path variables. It exists in Eclipse. We don't know why we have to reinvent the wheel. So you can deal with the path variables, You put your template inside the Eclipse folder, and you can get those variables in your template. It's something very important for batch generation, where you can launch several generations of documents in one side on your machine, etc. Another point, I will go it very briefly because I have an example, is the possibility to factorize the code in your template. It was something that people asked. You can separate the template and have several parts in your document. Brand new features, the bookmarks and hyperlinks. We can dynamically, thank you, generate bookmarks and hyperlinks. It's very important. For example, if we want to generate once the structure of the model, generate the diagrams, we can generate the hyperlinks to say, I'm writing my template, I don't know where is my diagram, but I know it will be here at the generation, so I can create the bookmarks and the hyperlinks. This is what it looks like with tags, bookmarks, and as the result, we can have the hyperlinks. Question of time, we are okay? How many time I have? Thank you. A part very important is managing sub-part of diagrams. People do their diagrams, but you can have several concepts. For example, here I have a diagram about UML norm, and it's quite a mess. But I did it. I want it to be a mess, but it's a mess. And I can, at generation, with several configuration of the code, export two views of the same diagram. So if you want to focus on several parts of the diagram, you can express it on the template. I will show you a template. So to make a connection with the previous part, Cédric sent me an EMF model of an intent document. So we can see it here. So it's an EMF model, something very usual. And in my template, I separate the concerns. I say, I want a fragment, is the name of the method which deals with the format. I want a fragment which deals with the description. I want a fragment dealing with bullets. Someone for the paragraph. And dealing with pictures that are stored locally in the folders. Finally, I have the main, which says for each element, depending on the type, I will generate the correct content. So this is Gendoc2 code, basically. So I take my Eclipse, I select my template, and I can generate the document. So in a world where everybody uses Mylin Intent, and in a world where Eclipse forces us to generate document, we could have this kind of document generated, where we have the documentation of the tool EMF Compare, that's right? Yeah. That's right. So I have the introduction, the installation with the bullet, usage, some elements, to be defined. To be defined. To be defined. The pictures of the architecture, pictures, and it was just an example. I could deal with the hyperlinks, etc. I just deal what I show you in the template. So everything is derived from the template, and the style I applied on my titles, on my text, is kept, and I can deal with the global structure of the template. The idea in Gendoc2 is a developer does the template, a quality engineer does the style. It's what we want. So, what we have to remember about this talk, there is several needs in Eclipse, and we address in this talk the modeling. So the modeling for documentation in code, any code, in fact, and modeling where we want to generate documentation from a model. In the case of documentation and code synchronization, it's clear that we can use Mylin Intent. And if you want to have a document artifact compliant with the compiling quality process, you could, if you want, use Gendoc2. Thank you.
Do anyone have any question? Yeah.
Tell who is. Me.
When you split the diagram, how did you rearrange the elements of the diagram?
Not yet implemented. Now we select the part we want to display in the diagram, but obviously we are thinking about calling rearrange method dynamically, but we just focus on the hint. Sorry. on the rearrange of the diagram.
No other question? Yeah.
It's Obeo.
I'm your boss, right? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Have a nice day.